Hello.
Hi, out there in the interwebs.
How's it going?
Hope you're all doing well today.
We
We
got
we are
a
back.
couple people.
Our
Yeah.
our our Palpatine stream has been resurrected.
Yep.
Um,
Palpatine round 2.
through a mysterious blend of Sith magic and cloning. Here
I
we are
have
again.
I have a wayfinder, so that's how we got there.
Yep. we plugged it into our laptops because there are two of them.
Yes.
One for each of us. And
There's only
here we
2
are.
laptops in the whole world too.
Yeah.
Only 2.
But we are back. So if you weren't here last week, we started talking about Palpatine in the Rise of Skywalker,
Mhm.
and we want to continue that today after we had some technical problems midstream last time.
As we do here sometimes.
You know. Unfortunately, despite the extensive planning that we put into each of these before we go live, technical problems are not always something we can handle in the moment. So. Um,
But
So we
yeah.
appreciate you hanging out last week and coming back this week. Or
Yeah.
maybe this is your first time and you missed the other one altogether. We're glad you're here.
In which case you won't have to hear us double over. But so far I see Dale and John and Cal and Stuart and Sin. So welcome everybody. Hope you're all doing fantastic. But yeah, so Palpatine, um, there's so much to talk about, and I only kind of remember what we talked about last week. But
I think we mostly spent our time talking about how Sheev is just an excellent name.
we
Um,
we didn't
I think
we didn't do that. Hey Yagi, welcome. I will say though, I feel like I can't remember if I said it in our regular Rise of Skywalker stream that I now am like more okay with Palpatine having a first name. I don't like his first name, but I'm now more okay with him having one. Just on the basis of now we have 2 Palpatines, so
so.
now he needs a name. So that's fair.
It's gonna be like when we learn that Yoda has a different first name in season 2 of The Mandalorian.
As long as it's not stupid, then I'll be okay. That's kind of where I'm. I've never liked the name Sheev. I've never liked it.
I like it better if you pronounce it as Shiv.
Yeah,
So if you don't draw it out, I like that better. But
yeah, that's fair. But like Sheev, I'm like that's just not scary. It's like you have the Sheevies. Did you catch a case of the Sheevies?
I mean, a different person might just say it a lot to annoy their friends, but I wouldn't know what that's like.
No, you never would. Oh man, Sargon, welcome. Good to see people dropping in. So with that, obviously we're gonna be. The movie's been out almost a month now, so I feel like having to say we're going to do massive spoilers for the Rise of Skywalker should go without saying. But just in case, even though I've actually already ruined it. Hey, Star Wars Ramblings, welcome, Andy. How are you doing? It isn't a very absurd name. That's fair. Okay, so here's the thing about Sheev. This is why I'm really mad, and this is just so petty. But so in the Phantom Menace, he has a line where he says, "I must be Frank, Your Majesty," and I always wanted his name to be Frank Palpatine. And as long as he didn't have a first name, he could still be Frank Palpatine, and I was happy. And then he had to get the name Sheev, and there is no Frank Palpatine. And that's at the end of the day why I don't like the first name. It should
I
be
mean,
Frank.
I think Frank Underwood kind of ruined the possibility of that being a thing. Um,
That's probably true.
but I'll also say to Stuart, yeah, Dooku is also his first name, but that was like one of the only things I didn't like about Jedi Lost
Yeah.
is when Sifo Dyas just calls him Do.
Do,
I'm like, no,
do,
please
Scooby
don't.
Dooby
Do,
Doo.
do
Where
or do
are
not. Please
you?
do not. Do not.
It didn't bother me only because it bothered Dooku. If Dooku was like, "Do is my preferred nickname," actually, then I would have hated it. But because Dooku also hated it, I was like, "This is fine."
It's like when was it in Leia Princess of Alderaan where she calls Mon Mothma Mon,
Mon,
and I'm like,
hey
no, her
Mon,
name is Mon Mothma.
like
Like
she's from Jamaica.
it's one thing. Yeah.
Welcome, Mon. That's what I think. Maybe he named his
Uh,
son Frank. Yes, yes,
there we
John.
go.
That is my headcanon for right now. Ray's dad's name is Frank. Dang it. That's right. That's Frank Palpatine because there needs to be a Frank Palpatine. Oh man, there you go. But anyway, shall we start then? Why don't we start with that? Because I think that was something we kind of talked around last time before we got to the technical difficulties, and we never got around to. Is just the topic of the Palpatine family, right? Like,
Right.
and her brother or her lover Manny Poppins, exactly. Who died, bringing her some information, and she didn't even express any sadness over it at all. No, his son's name is Ray's dad. I like that.
I love the multiple vowels there too. It's very, very Zahn.
Well, he's probably cloned, so that's
Oh
why you
yeah.
have to have two vowels back to back. No, if it was Zahn, it would have at least three more vowels or no vowels at all. Like that's a Zahn name. It's one or the other, two extremes. But you just pretend Y is a vowel because it is sometimes, and then that's how you can pronounce anything. But yeah, so people kind of talk about how the sequel trilogy changed Star Wars in a way. Sheep! Stop making me laugh. We'll never get to anything serious. I feel like JJ read Cursed Child and thought this could work for Star Wars. I haven't read Cursed Child, but I think that's a Harry Potter thing. That's the
It
play.
is.
That's the play, right? There you go. Everyone keeps trying to talk to me about Horcruxes and Palpatine, and I'm like, I've seen all the movies once. I kind of remember what a Horcrux is.
I think Cursed Child, like what I know about it, apart than it's a play, I think it has to do with Voldemort having a baby.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. There you go.
So I think that's the reference there.
Makes sense. But yeah, so the sequel trilogy, or really Rise of Skywalker, has like changed Star Wars. Like, there's now their father's name is Tricops. That's also true. Rey's middle name is Ken. Rey Ken Palpatine. For those of you who have read Jedi Prince series. But for so long it was the Skywalker saga. It was
Right.
the story of Anakin Skywalker, Luke Skywalker, and then new characters with an evil Ben Solo. And then making Rey a Palpatine, kind of, pardon me, sorry guys, recontextualizes everything, and it becomes a story of like two houses. And you have like House Palpatine, House Skywalker, and how, you know, the first trilogy is one house corrupting the other, and then the other is the next is like the redemption of that house, and then I guess the sequel trilogy kind of in a way becomes the further redemption of both houses again. In a way, the Skywalkers through Ben, who had fallen, and then Rey, who just redeems the. In a way, she never takes up the family name, so maybe it's a stretch to say that she redeems the family name, but she certainly ends the family legacy. And I find that recontextualization interesting. I'm a little surprised that I'm not more bothered by it than I am, but I guess, like, so often we've had things in Star Wars that have completely changed how we look at things. The prequel trilogy completely changed. So many of the kind of bad Star Wars Legends novels are that way because, I mean, I give Children of the Jedi a lot of crap, but there's, you know, part of the issue with that book is it was before the prequel trilogy and people didn't understand what the Jedi Order was like yet. So, like, I feel like Star Wars fans are always recontextualizing Star Wars, like, the longer you're around. But I don't know. I just kind of went on, but like you.
Well, one of the things I like about the two houses kind of thing is that, you know, we don't know the particulars of this in canon, and really even with the Plagueis novel, we didn't know the particulars of it.
Yeah.
But to the extent that Palpatine intervened and did a Force thing, and whether he created Anakin or the Force responded to Palpatine and Plagueis by creating Anakin, which is kind of the assumption from Plagueis.
Right.
You know, the Palpatine line or Palpatine himself as an individual becomes kind of inextricably linked to the Skywalkers, and so I don't think it was not a pivot that I was anticipating before we saw the trailer at Celebration, but it's a pivot that I think makes sense given, again, the larger context of the entire saga. And again, we did talk about this some last week about how both of us are convinced that if if JJ had been in charge of the
Yeah.
entire saga, we would have gotten more Palpatine already.
Yes.
And I think that's the reason that it feels different now, is because we haven't been talking about Palpatine for the last 5 years, and now we are.
Right.
But I think it could have been other. But I think at the same time, we all learned about an empire and a New Hope and didn't give a whole lot of thought to who the Emperor was.
Right.
And so, like, I don't think you necessarily have to have the whole story laid out in front of you all at once in order for something to make sense. And I like the decision to bring back Palpatine, and I like the way that they did it. I know that one of the things that we were most nervous about in our last speculation stream was, how are they going to do this? Given that we know it's going to happen, what is it going to look like?
Right.
We were specifically worried about time heists being involved or things like that.
Yeah.
But I think it really worked, and I think it was true to who Palpatine was. And even though we did have to recontextualize some stuff, I think it makes sense in terms of the larger story that the last chapter would feature Palpatine's plan so prominently again, given that everything we saw so far in the other two trilogies was stuff that Palpatine had planned in advance.
Right.
It makes sense that this would be too.
Yeah, I absolutely think he would have a legacy. Welcome, Star Wars guy and Dale. Yeah, Matt Martin has confirmed. At the very least, he has confirmed that panel in the Vader comic doesn't imply that Palpatine created Anakin. But I mean, like what Django was saying, he was talking about the Legends novel Plagueis. My headcanon for a while, which is just, it is headcanon, it's not based off of anything, and it's partly based off of Legends information. And my kind of go-to with thematic stuff from Legends is you can still kind of pretend it's real until it's not. Just then you have to accept that it's not when you get told it's not. And my whole thing was, I thought the Sith, or at least Bane's Sith, were in some way a response, or some way the cause of whatever the imbalance is. We don't fully know what balance in the Force means. We don't fully understand like what the Chosen One prophecy means. But we do know that Star Wars considers the light side the good guys. I tweeted out the other day that, I had been one of the people talking about how, like, maybe Rise of Skywalker could give us a new definition of balance. Maybe we could see something different with, like, with Ben and Rey, and I was kind of on that train of wanting to see it. And then I realized, if you go back to Master and Apprentice and you look at the quote that's on the back of the book, which is Qui-Gon's quote of, like, you go towards the light because it's the light, nothing in Star Wars has really been telegraphing that the dark side was ever going to be like the good guy. That was something we wanted, because some of us wanted, because that was the recontextualization people were looking for, not the two-house recontextualization. But if in some way Palpatine is related to the imbalance, which I think he is, which is a headcanon thing, because Anakin returning and like killing Palpatine, and Palpatine did say he's died before, so he died in 6.
Right.
Unless he's referring to a different death. He died in 6, which makes me think that his death is somehow related to balancing the Force. His appearance is somehow related to the imbalance in the Force. It would make sense that whatever he's doing, or whatever his particular type of Sith are doing, would be the reason why the Force would send the Chosen One, to go back to the point you were making with Plagueis. And that's just grasping at straws. Like, they have intentionally not told us yet, but I certainly think that that's not in the realm of wacky to think that those things are related.
Right. I mean, even if you take some of the less oblique prophecies from Master and Apprentice, the ones that seem to more directly, apply to the Chosen One, the idea is that the Chosen One comes. It's like a if this then that kind of thing. Once these conditions are met, then the Chosen One will come, and I think Palpatine is one of those conditions. Like Palpatine, and maybe Plagueis, and maybe it's a specific thing they did, maybe it's not. But the rise of the Sith in that way, I think, contributed to the Force responding by sending the Chosen One into that particular moment. And I think it makes sense that the story would end that way too.
Right. Well, and I to go off of, I like Star Wars guy just said in chat, Palpatine made Snoke. Uh, you see that creating life via midi-chlorian influence. Because its dark side, there was a price. Snoke was powerful but decayed, hence the need for clones. I kind of like that idea. That maybe that's why there were multiple Snokes, because maybe his body couldn't keep alive for a while.
Well, and we talked last week about whether or not getting a new body was one of Palpatine's plans all along. And I kind of like the idea that Snoke might have been originally created because Palpatine was playing around with that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then it's almost like, some of the things like, what is it, like fudge or the microwave where things are invented accidentally.
Right.
It's like he's trying to do some Sith Force experiments or some cloning experiments, and Snoke is like the byproduct of it. But he's like,
right.
oh, I could use this too.
Yeah. This
it's
is
not what I was going for, but here it is.
Well, and we know he does that. This is definitely something we talked about in the first attempt at the stream, was the Kieran Gillen Vader comics that he was experimenting with replacements for the Force. And my kind of thought with that is, it up until I guess stuff we've seen in Rise of Skywalker, we haven't been told in new canon if clones could have the Force. Not that I can think of off the top of my head, anyway. So if Palpatine's backup plan is some sort of cloned body or resurrected body, that would make sense why he was looking for a replacement for the Force if he wasn't sure he was gonna have it when he came back. And obviously, I'm sure that was not the plan when that comic got written, but at the same time, it could have been. I have this. My mass conspiracy is anything that was written in 2015 was still written in the J.J. Abrams Star Wars before we got the Rian Johnson Star Wars. And there's just so much in like the Aftermath books that hint to a Palpatine return that I think this is something that JJ always wanted but didn't do because he didn't want to like tie up Ryan and Colin. So maybe because that Vader run was from 2015, maybe there were some sort of connections. But I don't know. I like that kind of thing.
I mean, and Aftermath telegraphs so much of this when you look at it in the context of what we know now.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Palpatine was interested in the unknown regions and was like using Thrawn to investigate the unknown region stuff. And we know that, the Imperial remnant fleet at the end rendezvous somewhere in the unknown regions. Like all of that makes sense in this context. And like a lot of people again talk about how this feels out of the blue to them, and it did, given what my expectations were after The Last Jedi. But I think given the entirety of what we've gotten since the Disney buyout, I think it makes sense, and I think it fits with what we've seen.
Well, Cal in the chat was saying in our Discord before the movie came out, like we were chatting in there, and I think it was you had Rey Palpatine on your list of final guesses before we went into the movie. So like maybe not everyone guessed it, but it's not out of the blue if some percentage of people guessed it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I like Star Wars Ramblings. Andy says, one thing I loved in Tross, Palps just straight cheated. He perverted the Force, and that's what caused the Force to awaken in Rey. I like that read too. I have a lot of thoughts about Rey and the dyad specifically, because I think Rey and Kylo are around 10 years apart in age, which none of that has anything to do with this stream. But that's just something that absolutely fascinates me, is the age difference and yet destiny connection between Rey and Kylo. But I think there's something to that. I think that whenever Palpatine came back, and like we don't even technically know he's a clone. Like all we know is Dom Monaghan was like, clones, dark magic, which I think he's saying as two different options. He's not saying dark magic made clones. He's saying it could be clones, it could be dark magic. So the movie doesn't even say how he came back, which I personally like, because now in a novelization or in a different book, they can give us the nitty gritty and how he came back, because there was no way they were ever going to explain how Palpatine came back in a good way to a general audience. There was just no way you were going to do this. And at the end of the day, J.J. Abrams made The Rise of Skywalker for the general audience, and that's why a lot of people are ticked, I think. But he made a movie that the general audience was going to understand, the general audience was going to be excited for, the general audience who maybe watched The Last Jedi once since they saw it in theaters could go to Rise of Skywalker and understand it, and that's the movie he made.
Yeah.
And you can love that or hate that, but that's the movie he made. And because of it, we didn't get the explanation of how Palpatine's back. He's on a weird machine. He's Palpatine. Let's go. And I'm personally relieved because now it can be explained properly in a different source.
Right.
But
I mean, I will say when I saw the film, I never read Palpatine's body as being a clone. Like I saw that as like life support for a corpse, like
right,
very
yeah.
Frankenstein like a reanimated body that is barely alive. And I feel like Snoke is almost obviously the result of some kind of cloning.
Mhm.
And I like the he's disfigured because that's the price you pay for doing dark side replication cloning whatever.
Mhm.
um but but I also don't think that given everything we've seen with clones and Palpatine's fascination with immortality,
Yep.
it makes sense that he would not just immediately give up on the idea of cloning.
Right.
So I don't see that as being you know somehow outside of what would make sense.
No, I agree. And like Stuart's saying, we see the full tank of Snoke clones. I mean, yeah, we see the Snoke clones, but just because he cloned Snoke doesn't mean that he was a clone. Like that doesn't mean that
Right.
they're not two different techniques.
I mean,
Um,
because part of the whole problem with I mean, this is something that like Star Trek gets into a little bit. Like every time you get in the transporter, are you the same person when you are
right,
reassembled? So like I can see Palpatine being very concerned about whether or not a cloned Palpatine is actually Palpatine. Like I think he's interested enough in it that he would play around with it and clone a dozen Snokes here and there. But I
right,
don't think that necessarily suggests that what we see of Palpatine is a clone, because honestly, if it was, why would it? Like I feel like it would look better
right. Yeah,
if it was like even Snoke is to me a better alternative than the rotting glassy eyed
right.
Palpatine that we see. So like I feel like if cloning was a possibility, then we would have seen a healthier looking Palpatine
Something that
than
didn't
what we
need
actually see.
to be on the rack or whatever. Yeah. Um, Star Wars guy said if Palpatine could just create a candidate, he would. He wouldn't have wasted time with Rey or Ben. I think that's true too. And I think that the possession thing could be part of that because like there's so much stuff that we get, and at some level I'm with Star Wars ramblings of like we don't necessarily need the hard explanation of how he comes back. I don't see a world where we don't get that explanation though. Like knowing Star Wars, we'll get it. It's just are we gonna get it next year? Or are we gonna get it in 15 years when they try to tell some other sort of wacky story that recontextualizes the sequel trilogy? But we'll get it. But like I don't know, I feel like I lost my train of thought somewhere. I was saying something and I completely lost what I was saying.
You were saying you agreed with
Oh, what Star Wars
not
guy was
getting
saying.
an
Oh yeah,
answer.
that he wouldn't waste
Yeah.
time with Ray or Ben. I think with the possession thing, we see all of this stuff, um, and it's so easy because they didn't give us a lot of information to look at it and go, "This is how this works," and we don't know. And I think that's right now is an exciting time period because there's so much still to speculate about. Even though the movie's done, the Skywalker saga is done, there's still so many questions I have and I want to come up with theories for, but it's also a dangerous time because it's a very dangerous time to make assumptions again.
Yeah.
So I think it's easy to say like, well, Palpatine could have just possessed Snoke. Well, what if he couldn't? What if he could only possess somebody that he had some sort of destiny link with? And so it could
Right.
only be Ben or Rey. And because Ben
Right.
is 10 years older, he only had Ben. And that's kind of my argument for like why was he working so hard on Ben and not Rey? I'm like, well, for first of all, he had 10 years with Ben before Rey was even
Yeah.
born. So that's
Right.
that's the start of it.
Well, and I'll also disagree just very slightly
Yeah.
on the idea that he wouldn't waste time with Ben and Ray, because
Mhm.
I think he absolutely would. Like, I think everything we know about Palpatine says that even if he thought he could create a candidate, whole cloth by himself. I think he absolutely would waste as many time with as many contingency plans as he thought he needed. And so I mean, especially if he doesn't have anything better to do than sit on Exegol and force project conversation into Ben Solo's mind.
Right.
Like I think absolutely he would say, I'm going to do my experiments over here, and in my free time, I'm going
Right.
to talk to this kid on the shuttle with Luke.
Right.
As Luke goes on a mission.
Right.
But like I think that makes complete sense to me, and I get the sentiment, and I don't disagree
Yeah.
with if he could obviously have a better option, he would have pursued that. But I can also see him wanting to have as many irons in that fire as he could.
Oh no,
because
yeah.
that's how he operates.
I completely agree with that. I think the way I was responding is, I think ultimately, if Palpatine could have created his own body rather than possessing somebody else's, he would
Sure,
rather
yeah.
do that. So like if he could,
I think so too. Yeah.
he would still mess with Ben and Rey, but he might not be messing with possessing them. Is kind of how I would take that, because I think that would be
I mean,
messier.
it's just like I think he had a preference that the Republic win the Clone War, but I don't think. I mean, he wins either way, but I think he had a preference for one over the other.
Yeah, I would agree with that too.
I mean, that's why once he realizes that he can drain the dyad to rejuvenate himself,
yeah,
like he obviously prefers that option.
yeah,
Like
he
that
would
is,
rather just be in that body.
I mean, and it's a vanity thing, right? Like even Luke tells him, your overconfidence is your weakness. Like
Yep.
it's all about himself. Like the ultimate version of Sith selfishness
Yeah.
is to want to be immortal, right? Like
Yep.
that's everything. We're Yoda and the Jedi teach us we have to be ready to let go even of ourselves.
Yep.
Sith want to like literally be immortal for their own vainglorious selfishness.
Yeah. As themselves. Sorry, I keep coughing in everyone's ear. There's some talk about Snoke. I don't know. I feel like there's been some references in some of the guidebooks, but guidebooks are also easily overruled in lieu of actual story. But we don't really know a lot about Snoke, but I'm not sure it really matters where he got the DNA from. I mean, like, if we get that story, that's a cool story, but I'm not sitting around like, where did he find the Snoke DNA? Like, he found the Snoke DNA.
I mean, and somebody mentioned the visual dictionary says something to the effect of it being either an unknown species or like a species all into itself. So it could be that it's a completely created thing. It could be something he found along the way. I don't know that it. I mean, it'd be cool to know, but I don't know that I need to know in order to make sense of
it.
Snoke as a created thing.
Now, Dale has an interesting point. Draining life force seems like a temporary solution and still not immortality. I don't know that Palpatine thought he was immortal in that moment, though. I think he just became powerful again. But that's a good. I hadn't really thought of it that way.
I mean, I think if he had drained them both to the point of death, I can see that. I mean, because like what is, and again, I know this is Legends, for take it for what it's worth, but when we read Red Harvest, the idea is, that Sith guy whose name I don't remember is wanting to do an experiment where like he kills a Jedi and drains their life force and becomes immortal. I mean, but also like if that buys Palpatine another 5 years or 10 years or 50 years, like I think I don't know that temporary is not also something he's fine with, at least in the moment.
Well, what I kind of wonder, now that we have this, and this is something I kind of want to talk about a little bit too, is this new thing where Palpatine was like, I am all the Sith, which is a concept completely new in anything I've ever read, other than maybe the end of the Darth Bane trilogy. This idea of like Sith consuming other Sith and like being that Sith still. Maybe some stuff with Nihilus, but even then, he kind of takes you to nothingness. He doesn't really absorb you, But certainly nothing in canon. I kind of wonder, because my biggest beef, for those of you who don't know, I read Plagueis a long time ago, and I didn't like Plagueis. I liked the first 2/3 of Plagueis, and I really hated the last third, because I hated the idea of Plagueis being alive during the Phantom Menace. That's not what this stream is about. We don't need to get into that. But what if Palpatine has been inhabiting all these bodies for a long time? He could be a lot older than we've ever imagined, and
Oh
Plagueis
yeah, I
could
haven't thought about that.
Plagueis could still be his Sith master, but his he could be from a while ago. And this will probably make people nervous, because everybody really wants Project Luminous to not be connected to everything. But if Project Luminous is the High Republic era and is 400 years back, it could be a Palpatine origin story if Palpatine is that ancient now.
I mean, or even if it's not that specific,
Right.
like to the extent that the Force manifested itself in the Chosen One in Anakin. That was what was the Sith equivalent to that Bane thought he was?
Oh, the Sithari.
The Sithari.
Yep.
Well, like what if there is some, even if it's a lesser equivalent, that the Sithari is born and reborn and reborn. Yeah. And that's what Palpatine is, as when he says, or maybe that's even a side effect of his reanimation. He becomes that in that moment, even if he was not beforehand.
But yeah,
I don't know.
I like that. Also, welcome VSG. Hope you're doing good. But yeah, I think we could see some stuff of that too. I like the idea of, like, this implied idea of every Sith Lord is like the embodiment of the previous Sith Lord, and like,
oh, yeah.
when you kill your Sith Master, like, is that how it works? Like, if you kill your Sith Master in anger, do they like possess you, and then like you become them too? And so like literally every Sith is the embodiment of every Sith before, or is that just Palp's like talking out of his butt? Like, I'm so awesome, I'm every Sith, because I'm the one that's still alive. Like, is it just hype, or is it literal?
I mean, I read it as hype, but I think there are a lot of interesting ways you can take it if it's literal.
Literal, yeah.
So I certainly don't mind the speculation. That's what we do best, right?
That's right, exactly.
Palps was obsessed. I read it in the moment as him just being like hyping up himself.
Yeah.
That's why I loved when Rey was not. Like, I like Palpatine saying, "Oh, I'm all the Sith," and Rey like being like, "No, actually I am all the Jedi right now."
Like, I'm not making this up. I am actually, like, I just literally heard all their voices. I brought Samuel L. Jackson with me. You're going down. Like,
Rey tells Palpatine, "Did you even see that Freddie Prinze Jr. rant? Like, he's right here now."
Here. We have Liam Neeson. He's done like 8 Taken movies. Like, we're solid. Like, we got a good team here. You have a bunch of non-canonized people. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's how he's just like Jack Bauer, right? His family members just get abducted over and over and over.
Over and over and over again. You also didn't get far enough to know that Jack Bauer has a bad father.
Well, nothing surprises me about that, honestly.
But yeah, that's where I'm at too. That's the thing with, because to me that makes it a big part of Palpatine's plan too. Like, is he centuries old? How long has he been planning this? Or is he just a couple of decades old? Is he a normal human body? And is he, like, what kind of power is he carrying? Like, I don't know.
Well, and it was also always my headcanon too, and I realized this was headcanon even if it was a semi-popular one, that the Palpatine that we see in the original trilogy is not his actual appearance anyway. Like, that it's not scars that he gets in his fight with Windu that he lets that facade fall.
Right.
And I really like that, because when he appears to Ezra in the World Between Worlds, like, he starts off as one and morphs into the other. And so, like, I've always liked that idea. And so if that were the case, and I'm not necessarily saying that it is, but if that were the case, that doesn't necessarily mean we know anything about who he is or how old he is or what he is. I mean, like, that opens up a lot of possibilities there too.
Yeah, and I really
because his age at that moment doesn't have to be the same as Ian McDiarmid anyway.
Right. Yeah. And I really like the idea that if he really is this representation of the space devil, that he's actually a lot older and a lot more powerful, a lot more, like, nasty than we ever thought, and that there's this kind of bubbling history when you see him.
Right.
So that's something I would be very interested in that. Now, if it ends up being the simplest solution that he's a guy from Naboo who was super powerful and was trained by Darth Plagueis, that's like, I'm not saying like I have to have this crazy theory, but like now that we've gotten the craziness that we've gotten, I'm like, okay, so now we can really go wacky.
I mean, and also, again, if we want to be meta about it, to the extent that Legends canon is supposed to be thought of as like these are the legends of the Star Wars universe,
Right.
like the Plagueis novel makes sense as a cover story.
Yeah.
Like it makes sense as a story that Palpatine would tell people and write down as, oh yeah, this is my origin story,
Mhm.
you know, as almost a fake out.
Right.
Which I don't know. I'm not necessarily saying is true one way or another. I'm just
Right.
saying
Would be
you can think of it that way too.
which would be interesting. John Barry said Palps was obsessed with Rey / Luke striking him down. I talked about this a little bit last week, but now I really wonder, again, as we recontextualize everything, if Palpatine didn't want to possess Luke's body in Return of the Jedi, and that's just total out there question that we may never know the answer to. But that's something I've thought about a lot because it happens to be the same thing. Like, strike me down in your hate. And he might not be rigged up to a big machine, but we don't know what's in that chair. I mean, we don't know what kind of like hidden things are in there that could allow some sort of procedure.
It's a wireless battery charger, unopposed, opposed to the wired one that he has
Exactly.
in Rise of Skywalker.
Mhm.
Um, but I also like that moment. Like I think you can definitely read a lot of stuff into it, and I think that's fun. But
Mhm.
I like when I saw Rise of Skywalker, I read that as him trying to recreate as much as possible the moment on the Death Star
Yeah.
as like a spite to Luke, and
Oh
so
yeah,
like
yeah. I could see
I
that.
like that too. But I also think it makes sense to me that whether he's trying to get Luke to strike him down because it's the same type of possession experiment or
Mhm.
because he's trying to push him toward the dark, like whatever that is,
Yeah.
like I think it
Yeah.
makes sense for him to want to recreate something with Rey,
Yeah.
even if it's not the striking down of it that would allow him to possess it, but the striking down of him that would like solidify her with the dark side. Like once you have taken a life in anger, now I can more easily possess you.
Right.
And so it may not be that striking him down is what allows the like the literal possession,
Yeah.
but it's what makes her dark enough for him to possess
Possess. Yeah.
even.
Well, especially if that body is not fully alive, her striking it is not going to kill him if he's not fully alive anyway. You know what I mean?
Right.
Star Wars guy makes a good point of he did have Vader to protect him in Return of the Jedi. Yeah, I mean, like, my he wanted to possess Luke theory is 100% a crack theory, but it's still my crack theory for right now. But no, I what I appreciate in what Rise of Skywalker does show us though is he is upset when Rey won't do it.
Yeah.
Like, I think whatever his plan was, I don't, because I've seen some people think it was a bluff, but I don't think it was, because when she puts the saber back and he's all excited and he's hyping up everybody, and then she sends it to Ben and then she pulls out Leia's saber. He's disappointed that she has chosen that path. And I don't think it's a grandfatherly disappointment. I think it's okay, we got to come up with another plan now because this didn't work.
So,
Which he certainly still has. He just won't do it. Exactly. Do it. One other, to kind of tangent a little bit, because this is a regular critique I see of the film, is people are saying how she was going to strike him down, and then later she doesn't strike him down, but she deflects his own power back at him. And like, what was it about that? Like, why would him dying one way allow him to possess her, and why when he was possessed, or like he died another way, why couldn't he possess her? And I think there's a couple different things going on. I think one, the difference between striking down in hate and aggression versus deflecting power back on him, in her state of being. But I also think that once he drains Rey and Ben, and he is like taken up his body and he gets off of that machine. Maybe I'm taking the movie too literally, or maybe I'm trying to put stuff where it shouldn't be, but I think like that's somehow involved. I think once he disconnects from all of the Sith cultist stuff, whatever the ritual would be can't happen anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I also think that it could be that in that last confrontation, she is powered by all of the
The
Jedi,
Jedi, yeah,
and at that moment, possession is not a possibility.
yeah.
Like, like
She's the
there's
motel
no
is
more
full
room
up.
at the inn; it's
Yeah,
full. Like, there's
exactly.
no vacancy here.
Yep, I
Um,
think that's possible too.
but I don't know. I just one of the things I've always liked about Palpatine though is that he is just the master planner.
Yeah,
Like he has so many different contingency plans, and that's why I like how he was used because like you can see how all these contingency plans, like he had Snoke,
yep,
and then he had Ben, and he also had Rey, and then he had draining the dyad, and like
mm,
I honestly like I think he probably had preferences, but at the end of the day, he's down for whatever works.
yep,
Like as long as whatever works leads him to power, and as long as whatever works leads him to being in control,
yep,
like I don't think he cares
yep.
about the details at the end of the day. And that is every bit the Palpatine that we have seen before.
Welcome,
And
Noel.
I also oh yeah, hey no, I didn't see that. But I also would say too about Ray striking him down
Yeah,
and stuff like that too. I'm I'm convinced that the vision she has of herself on the throne is one that he gave her,
mm,
but to the extent that it's not, that it's just a forced vision, I think it could have been a forced vision that they both had of a potential future. And so when it doesn't happen, he realizes that the future that he's seen is not the future that's going to play out. And that's part of the disappointment there too.
yeah.
Um, is that he thinks he is certain of the future and
Right.
realizes that he's not.
I had I can't remember if it was a comment on one of the videos or if it was on Twitter, but somebody pointed out that Palpatine was the master planner, but he could never really understand true selflessness, which is why true selflessness is what got him every time, either in the
Right.
form of Vader saving Anakin, saving Luke, or what Rey does. And this is what I love symbolically so much about Rey, and I talk about it, I think, in both of my Rey videos, is the idea that Rey is at Rey is like she's collapsed on the floor. She has no physical strength yet. She's been drained literally of her own life force. And when the Jedi in the light side of the force kind of comes on her and takes over, um it's really like it is her, but it's really not. Like she has let go of herself, her conscious self, and is acting as a pure conduit of the force. And
Yeah.
that's a different kind of selflessness than what we saw with Vader and Luke. It is the type of selflessness we see with Ben and Rey later, that is the same as Vader and Luke. But what Rey's doing is literally letting go of herself and letting the Force take over, and that is not something that Palpatine can understand at all or could see coming.
Which again, I say, and I know a lot of people get antsy about this type of thing on Twitter.
Hmm.
I don't think happens if she hadn't learned the Rey Nobody lesson from the Last Jedi.
I agree.
Like I think that can only happen because she learned to value herself enough to be able to set herself aside. Like I feel
Hmm.
like you don't get that
Hmm.
without what she goes through. I mean, I get you could do it other ways in different stories,
Yeah.
but in terms of the story we get, like
Yeah.
that's the connection there, and that's why this doesn't like her being a Palpatine doesn't undo for me
Hmm.
Rey being a nobody. It's because she has an opportunity in the Rise
Hmm.
of Skywalker to have the familial connection that she always thought she wanted.
Yep.
And this is tempting her after she thinks she has figured out that it doesn't matter.
Right.
And it's only by realizing that she was right that in her conclusion in the Last Jedi that she's able to over. I mean, it's just like Luke. Luke
Yep.
realizes he was right, that there was still good in his father. He could
Yep.
have been wrong and could have defeated Vader, and that could have been a fun story, I suppose.
Yep.
But he realizes that he's right. Despite the temptation, he realizes his original position was the correct one,
Yep.
and that's how he wins.
Yep. I agree. No, I'm right there with you. I compared it on Twitter to a Jedi is given a lightsaber, and they have this very spiritual connection to a lightsaber, but a lightsaber isn't 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 the Jedi, and isn't the relationship with the Force, and like you're supposed to use this lightsaber as this tool in your life as a Jedi, but it can't be a replacement for anything else. And if you are not good enough as a Jedi without your lightsaber, you're never going to be good enough as a Jedi with your lightsaber, right? Like if you don't have that core thing, having the lightsaber isn't what makes you a Jedi, even though it's the symbol for being the Jedi. And I kind of see that with Rey, with her name and her place, her lineage, is if she wasn't good enough without, she was never going to be good enough with. And she had to learn that lesson of like, no, you, Rey, matter. And that's what we see at the end of The Last Jedi. But then it's like, okay, but you actually have a familial connection, and it's actually really dangerous and scary. But you can reject it because you know who you are. And now we're getting way off the top. I guess we're still talking about Palpatines.
I mean, to the extent that, again, all of this is part of his plan by having children.
Yeah.
Whatever form that takes.
Yeah.
But
we really haven't talked about Palps' son, Frank Palpatine, Rey's dad, Palpatine, very much. And we are, because we're getting near the end of the hour. My gut on Frank Palpatine, as we'll call him, is that everyone's kind of jumping to the conclusion of like, oh, what really zealous Sith cultist was like, this is my honor in life. And I'm kind of like, I just think that Frank was born in a vat. I think that Frank was also an experiment. This is all headcanon, but my guess is that Frank has no force powers, or at least not sizable force powers, because otherwise Palpatine would have been looking for him and not Rey. Like, why screw with trying to find your granddaughter when you could try to find your son? So if Frank didn't have any force powers, Palpatine could just have been like, I don't care, you can run away. No one's gonna believe you when you say who your father is. So I literally give zero craps about you. You can run off. And then Frank had Rey, and then suddenly Palpatine was like, hey, hold on a second. I'm suddenly really interested in this family thing.
Especially if Rey has powers and Frank doesn't.
Exactly. Yep. Because I think it's important when we say like the Force awakened in Rey. Rey has also said, there's been something inside me that's always been there, and now it's awake. So like the implication is that she has always had the Force. It's not like the Force suddenly, she was never Force sensitive. She was just a scavenger, and then the Force showed up one day when it was like it was like Force puberty, and now suddenly she's Force sensitive, and it just showed up one day. Like, she was always Force sensitive. It's just something happened, and suddenly she could touch it in some other way. And now I just have the phrase Force puberty stuck in my head, so I did that to myself. But there you go.
I mean, I think the easiest and best explanation for it is that Sheev was on a planet and came in contact with the ghost of a former Jedi named Callista. And then Callista embodies a different person, and Sheev and Callista have Frank. I think that's the most logical explanation.
It's the only logical explanation. Nothing else. We have figured it out. We'll email Pablo and be like, we figured it out, Pablo, and he'll block us. Well, we're already blocked by Pablo, actually, so it's okay.
I mean, all the signs are there, honestly.
Right. I think that's clear and obvious. I think that just goes without saying.
And VSG says, I think Frank doesn't even have a Palpatine last name. I think it's possible that he is the son, like whatever that means, to be the son of Palpatine without
Mm.
knowing who his father is. Like he knows his father, but doesn't realize his father is Sith Lord Emperor, is just creepy old guy. I think that's even a possibility too. And yeah, most of Twitter is blocked by
By
Pablo now.
Pablo. Pablo
Yeah.
literally ran a blockchain on everyone he wasn't following. And like blocked. Yeah, it's a long story. We don't need to get into. But yes, we are, but not because we did anything bad. But I think that's possible too, and I don't think that Rey would have ever known her last name would have been Palpatine.
Yeah.
I don't think that's something. If her parents were trying to hide her, I think it's possible that I think at some level through the Force she could have known that she had some sort of important past, which is why it was always such an important question to her. But that she didn't really have any knowledge of what that meant. I will say too, real quick, it's another regular critique where everyone's like, "Why would Rey even know the name Palpatine? Wouldn't she be like Palpatine who?" And that is I'm trying to be really respectful of people's arguments, but that is a dumb argument. He used to be the emperor of the whole freaking galaxy. That's like saying you've never heard of Hitler. And you go, Hitler who? Like, everyone knows who Palpatine is. She's been hanging around with Leia for a year. Now, would it mean a whole heck of a lot to her? Maybe not. But, like, this knowledge that she would just, like, who's Palpatine? It's just, like, that's one critique of 9 that I cannot take seriously in any way.
I mean, and honestly, I feel like she probably has a better idea of who he is than most people because
Yep.
Luke told her.
Yeah.
Like Luke uses his Sith name to describe
Darth
him.
Sidious.
Like, and like she has these journals, and we know that Luke marked up these journals with his own thoughts. Like, I guarantee you that like she not only knows his name, but she probably knows that the Emperor was a Sith Lord, and that's not a thing that was common knowledge.
Right. Like, I that was just one thing. By the time that Palpatine knew Frank was alive, he knew he was a good-hearted person, so he couldn't expose himself to Frank, and Frank would make Palpatine public knowledge. Maybe. I mean, like in that scenario, that's like Frank was born and like released, and like never knew Palpatine. And I'm not sure. To me, if Palpatine had a baby and he didn't want the baby, he would kill the baby. He would not be like, I'm releasing the baby into the wild, and maybe a pack of wolves will raise him and name him Mowgli. Like, that's not what Palpatine's gonna do.
I can see Frank though growing up with like the Sith cultist and being like the angsty teen, except it's like the opposite of like Punk.
Yeah.
He's like, Dad, I want to be good. Oh.
Yeah, it's like, gosh.
Why do you want me to be so evil? God, Dad.
I just want to help an old lady across the street. Why can't you understand me?
I just want to go make cookies with Fred. God.
Gosh. I was gonna go get you some power converters, Dad. What's your problem? Now I really want that story. I really want good boy angsty Frank Palpatine so much. That's a thing. But yeah, so I'm down for that. And like I wanna I obviously wanna know his story, and like Rey's mom is a character now, and like maybe she's not also Force sensitive or whatever, but like who is she and what happened? Like somebody was joking around about how we were gonna get that story, and I'm like, no, I do want that story. Like, I definitely do. I don't know.
Well, and I think if I'm honest, and maybe this is a controversial take, I think a lot of people wanted, or they say they wanted more of this explanation in The Rise of Skywalker, but I don't think most people would have wanted the 3.5 hour long exposition that would have required. Like, it's easy for us to say now that that's not what, like, that's what we wanted. But if that's what we had gotten, we would have been on Twitter complaining, why is this film so long? Like, why did it have to tell us all this stuff? Why couldn't it have left some of this to our imagination, or left some of this for other novels?
This guy explained too much. I think at the end of the day, the people who really want more explanation of like where Palpatine came from, more explanation of Rey's parents, more explanation of all of this stuff, I think it's coming from a good place. I think it's people who are let down in the film, but genuinely want to like the movie, and genuinely want to understand the movie. And their line of thinking is, if this was explained to me, maybe I wouldn't hate it. I think that's really like,
And that's fair.
yeah, like I don't want to hate it. Maybe if I understood it, I wouldn't hate it. But I don't know that that's much like Rey, who always wanted answers and didn't like the answers she got. Maybe if they had explained this, it wouldn't make you like it any more than you already do. And that's,
Well,
yeah,
and I think too, and you and I don't know if we talked about this on stream or if this was a you and I conversation, but it all blends together at
yeah.
some point. You know, who is Claude? But
Who is? I recorded that,
but
by the way.
oh, good. But we talked at some point about whether or not Luke knew Rey was a Palpatine,
Right.
and I think that he very likely did as soon as he let himself feel the Force again.
That's my thought too.
And
Yep.
and if that is true, if you believe that, when Luke tells Rey this is not going to go how you think,
Yep.
like that's exactly
Changes
what that
everything.
is.
Like that
And like
line was
to
good
us,
already, but now it's like, oh.
and as much as, I mean, I like this, other people distinctly hate this, but as much as The Last Jedi was a statement to us as fans, this is not going to go as you think.
Yep.
It means the same thing then too.
Yep.
Like, when you want specific answers, realize the possibility that those specific answers could be things you do not want.
Yep. Yep. That's that's been my pet theory, is that Luke would meet Rey. He has cut himself off from the Force, so he wouldn't know who she is. I think he could probably still get some kind of destiny juice off of her, because she'd have a lot of it, which is why he is like asking her and trying to figure out why she's here. But I think it's that moment when he reaches out and he connects to Leia, and he opens himself up to the Force. He's like, "Oh snap! I let a Palpatine on my island. Oh crap!" And it also makes things make sense, because if you watch The Last Jedi, they're like, Rey goes into the toilet of the dark side and has her vision. This is how I describe everything in Star Wars. I'm sorry. She goes into the dark side toilet and pops back up, and then she goes and has the hand touch scene with Kylo, and Luke literally like connects to the Force and then shows up and he's just ticked off. And the implication, without like who Rey is that he's the mad father who caught his daughter talking to the boy he doesn't like or whatever. Like, he busts in. But if he's like, I just let a Palpatine on my island, and now she's talking to my dark side nephew, oh frick, like suddenly his crankiness makes way more sense to me. Like, it never didn't make sense, but now I'm like, okay, like I don't think he's overreacting anymore. Like, it used to be like,
Yeah.
Luke, calm down, they literally just touched hands, and now it's like, oh, he gets it.
Yeah.
The other thing I saw something on Twitter. Somebody was like, and then Leia probably knew once Luke told her. I'm like, no, Leia probably knew. Like, I don't believe this
I
Luke
mean,
told her thing.
Leia spent more time with Emperor Palpatine than Luke did. So,
Yeah.
like, if once she opens herself up to the Force, I think she's way more likely to understand that than Luke was, because she knew the guy.
Yep.
Like, she didn't know him as Sith Lord, but like she
knew the guy.
She knew him as Emperor to Imperial Senator.
Yep.
Like,
and one thing people
he hung out at dude's house.
Yeah. One thing people have kind of pointed out about Force Awakens is at the end of the movie, Leia, who doesn't really know Rey super well, runs up and gives her a hug. And I'm like, yeah, but that hug makes a lot more sense when Leia, who has spent her whole, like, latter half of her life, like, coming to terms with the fact that Darth Vader is her father, and what does it mean to, like, be the daughter of this horrible, evil person, who sees the granddaughter of this horrible, evil person, who's, like, discovering all, like, Leia, more than anyone else, understands what Rey's going through. And, like, I know I am breaking the confidence of a lot of people when I say that, because it's supposed to be like Ben Kylo understands Rey more than anyone else, but Leia in this context really
Right.
understands Rey. And
Well,
uh
and I think that is Leia also knowing that she let that moment with Ben go by.
yep,
Like that's bloodline, right?
yep,
She let the moment where she could explain all that to Ben on her own terms and be
yep,
the one giving him the hug.
yep,
Like she missed that opportunity,
yep,
and here she is with Ray, and not that Ray is necessarily her surrogate child in this moment, but she
right.
realizes she has an opportunity to be that person for Ray when
Mhm.
she wasn't there in that moment for Ben.
Mhm.
Um, Speaking of
Right.
which, I'm really hoping the Rise of Kylo comic shows us that moment in Bloodline where Ben
Yes.
learns about
I really hope so
Vader.
too. And I think it's cool that if it all lines up correctly, I don't know. I like the idea that Snoke was talking to him. It's always been my headcanon that Snoke and I guess now Palpatine started talking to Ben, so Ben actually knew all of this before he got told, which is part of why
Yeah,
he's so mad. But we'll see
yeah.
if that's true or not. We're nearing time, so before we run, I just want to say like a quick. I don't mind that he had 9 gajillion Star Destroyers with planet killers on him.
Oh yeah, that was something I wanted to mention too, just because
Yep.
I saw a lot of people complaining about that idea. And
Mhm.
honestly, I didn't like that the Force Awakens had new, better planet killers.
Yep.
But if
Same.
Palpatine was behind things all the
Yep.
time, I have zero problem with it now because
Yep.
Palpatine was 100% on board with planet killers all
Yep.
along. Like
Yep.
that was like and that's his frustration with Vader, or Vader's frustration with the Death Star, right?
Yep.
Is Vader says rely on the Force and only the Force, and Palpatine wants a backup plan.
Yep.
And so like if he's spent 30 years hiding out in the unknown regions,
Yep.
you better bet he's going to have a planet killer on every Star Destroyer,
Yep.
because he's like, no, this time I'm really going to be in charge.
Yep.
Like this time there are no more trench runs, there are no more indoors. This time
Yep.
every one of these things
Has a planet
has
killer,
has a planet killer.
and we're gonna
Come
use
at me
them.
now, bro.
Yep. And the same guy that had 2 Death Stars in 1 trilogy, who was like, I really like planet killers, and I'm with you too. Like I love Force Awakens. I've come to terms with Star Killer Base, but it was the okay another planet killer kind of a thing. But if they were all being guided by Palpatine, I've said this on a couple other things, is it's Palpatine wasn't going to suddenly go, I'm bored of these planet killers. Narratively, it's just not doing anything for my life.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try a new method. Like that's not in line with his character at all. That's not how people
Right.
work. No one goes, these nuke things are really boring. Let's try like something else just to like
Right.
because we should have a narrative structure to world history. Let's try a different way to kill each other. Like once the cat's out of the bag, that's what you do.
Guns are so unoriginal.
Yeah, like what? I'm just so many guns. Like come up. Even in Star Wars, I'm like the Jedi never go. Guys, these lightsabers, man. Like, have we tried anything else? So
I
if
mean,
it
if anything, it's the opposite. Obi-Wan's like, oh, those blasters are so uncivilized.
right,
Like your kids with your newfangled weapons. Like, go
we-
back to the old ones that worked.
we're gonna keep that. And so yeah, that's my thing. Is if we had gotten Hux in charge of the First Order and he was really the villain all along, or something else, then yeah, I would think that the saber rifles like from the Vader comic. Um, I would think that a planet killer on every Star Destroyer was groan inducing, but because it's Palpatine, I'm like, no, this makes sense. Like, I'll
Mm.
accept it because it's Palpatine.
I mean, and especially now, and I won't say how or where this happens for people that don't want other things spoiled for them,
Mm-hmm.
but especially now that canon has basically all but 100%
Yep.
confirmed that the Ilum was being excavated
Yep.
to be Starkiller Base
Yep.
during the time of the Empire,
Yep.
like that was already happening. Like it all
That
flows
makes
better.
way more sense. So I don't
Yeah.
know. There's connections out there if you want to look for them. And I think Palpatine's
Me-
plans all make way more sense if you just kind of want to go back and look at the stuff. But that's yeah. where I'm
I mean, you
at.
could also just take the laser out of the Death Star and keep it as a separate thing, and then maybe the Hutts would want it and would call it the Darksaber.
It's true.
Back to the real heart of Star Wars.
Or the door killer in Last Jedi.
Yeah.
What I try so hard not to be so snarky about all the stuff that people don't like in Rise of Skywalker that's in The Last Jedi that they just want to pretend doesn't exist in The Last Jedi, and I'm like, Rian Johnson makes significantly slower paced films that therefore worry more about emotion, and that's literally the end of the differences between Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker. I'm sorry to tell you, but that's okay. I won't break your illusions for you yet. I'll give you more time to mourn before I break the news to you that they're actually.
I mean, and that's true. Star Wars guy too. Sith have been obsessed with planet killers going all the way back to Malachor. So.
Yep.
Like, and that's mostly canon now again too. So.
Yep. So there you go. But I think that's what I have to say for now. I think next week we'll try to do same bat time, same bat channel. Maybe Mandalorian, because we haven't done a Mandalorian stream yet.
Yeah, and I hesitate to say anything for certain because that's how we get in trouble.
Yeah. If it's not I think this time Tuesday, we'll aim for this time Thursday. But we're gonna Tuesday's the plan A. But like Palpatine, we have multiple plans.
There we go. But thank you guys for coming to week 2 of the Port Haven StreamCast.
Yes. I should have called it that. That's good. I still can.
But follow us on all the places.
Yeah.
You know where they are.
Thank you so much, guys. Oh, and don't forget to like the stream on your way out.
We'll also say, since it has happened now, this is not like the official. We'll do something more official later on, but we're over 1,000 subs now. So thanks, guys, if you're part of that, and we have some 1,000 sub content.
Yes.
That's coming soon.
Great,
that we promised. So
great content. We're all so excited for.
Actually, some of the ideas that we're talking about, I'm pretty excited.
I am too, actually. Yeah. I am actually really excited to do, because we're gonna do a thing that I've been wanting to do for a while. So,
but thanks, guys, for that. And if you haven't already, you can hit that sub button and get us all the more closer to 2,000. So
yes,
onward and upward.
Thank you so much, guys.
We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.